Hi everyone, this is Chris Watterson. I'm going to walk you through my final project presentation, which my lesson is over Introduction to Modern Calligraphy. I chose this topic because I'm a professional artist and I used to be an art teacher, so this is a subject that's really easy for me to come up with the content, and I already am very familiar with the information, so it allows me to focus on the learning theories, which is what our final application project is all about. So with that, let's get started. My audience is going to be adult learners at my church, ages 20 through 75. We've got quite an age range. And because they're adult learners, they're going to come with their own experience to the class. Some of them may have tried calligraphy in the past. Some of them maybe not. Maybe this is their first time. But all of them have at least seen calligraphy out in the world, and that's going to be my starting place. The timing of this class is a one-time standalone offering, just like on a weeknight, and it's not going to be covered over multiple lessons. Like, this is the lesson and that's it. We're going to start with the learning objectives so that everyone has an understanding of where we're going with this class. We're going to start with the history of calligraphy. They're going to be able to see the difference between modern and traditional hands, recognize techniques for creating thick and thin lines, and then at the end they're going to be able to demonstrate the ability to create a thick and thin line using either a brush marker or another tool, whatever we have available at that time. For my learning objectives, I used Bloom's taxonomy of verbs. This helps me to make sure that my objectives are clear and to the point, and also have identified or using identified verbs that everyone has a clear understanding of what those mean, so that across the board, instructors who pick this up and maybe decide to teach this in the future, if it's not myself, they'll be able to know exactly what I intended by those objectives. So everyone is on the same page across the board, which is a great thing about Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm going to start the class with opening it up with this question: what is calligraphy? And because I have adult learners in the class, they're all going to come with their own understanding of what they think that means. So it's going to have this open-ended conversation where we can kind of discuss and apply to previous knowledge, which is a great foundation of cognitive learning, kind of connecting to what they've seen in the world and kind of what they feel like their understanding of calligraphy is, and then bring that to the actual definition of calligraphy, which I'll explain to them. And then this also follows along with Gagne's, I hope I'm saying his name right, 9 steps or 9 stages of learning, the introduction, gaining their attention, and then also calling on prior knowledge. So now that I've explained what calligraphy is, we're going to talk about the history of calligraphy. And continuing with our cognitive learning theory, I'm going to draw upon things that people are already familiar with, like making copies or using fonts on a computer. So the origins of those terms were that back in the day, in medieval times, if they wanted to have a copy, a monk would have to actually create that copy by hand or an illuminated manuscript. And so monks would learn a hand of calligraphy or a style of writing, whereas today we have fonts on the computer. So using these terms to connect to things that people are already familiar with, I can start to show styles of calligraphy that they probably have already seen out in the world on tattoos or bumper stickers or, print materials that they may have received. So I'm kind of drawing that connection to things they're familiar with so that we can build on that into the modern calligraphy style. So now that we've kind of built that foundation of the traditional, we're going to move into the modern, and we're going to just continue that cognitive theory of building on previous knowledge and the things that we've previously talked about. So we'll show examples of modern calligraphy. We'll talk about how the lines kind of flow together and create a piece as a whole. Like in this Hello December example, you can see it's seen as one unit versus individual letters. So trying to think holistically of the composition and how those lines flow together and how it draws your eye around the shapes and the flourishes that you have on there. We'll also talk about the differences between the traditional and the modern in the shapes, but also the differences between the tools that were used, because the traditional uses metal flat tip nibs and the modern can use any tool, as I'll show in a moment when we get to the tool section. So now that we're talking about tools, during this section, my goal is really to show the visuals of what the pens look like and also the types of marks that they make. So I'm kind of following along with the multimedia theory here that the human voice, my voice, is going to narrate what they're seeing on the screen. And since I'm doing this presentation live, my screen will kind of go along with what I'm talking about. So they'll have that kind of dual input from the audio and the visual. I'm also following, if you'll notice, trying to follow the multimedia theory throughout the entire presentation, because none of my images or words are going to conflict with the messages that I'm trying to convey. I'm not overloading that cognitive load, especially because we're talking about creative concepts. Sometimes people who are maybe less creative than others, it takes a little bit longer for them to catch on. So I try not to overwhelm them with too much information. So anything that I have on the screen is not going to compete with what I'm talking about. And here, even though these are words, really you're going to be looking at them as a visual element, because you're just noticing the marks, and the word that the mark is insignificant. So you're not going to have to be trying to read brush or anything like that. You're really just noticing, okay, that pen makes a mark like that. So it shouldn't affect cognitive load. And so that's my goal with this whole presentation, is to just make sure that the things that are on the screen are not overwhelming and they perfectly convey the concepts I'm trying to explain. So continuing to build our cognitive theory, continuing to build on what we've already talked about now that we've introduced the history, we know the concept of calligraphy, we know the tools that we're using, we know what modern calligraphy looks like. I'm going to demonstrate how to do it. And so in this section, because I'm an artist, I can actually demonstrate how to create the marks and doing the thick and thin lines and how to position your tools and the pressure to put on the tip and things like that. So a couple of ways that I would do this is either, if it's a small group, I might have them come gather around my table and just show them on paper in person. Another way I could do that is to do it digitally on my iPad using an Apple Pencil and have the iPad connected through the multimedia setup, so it's displayed on the screen, either a projector screen or the TV screen, whatever I'm using. I can have my iPad mirrored up there and they can see me create those marks live and do it that way. I think there's benefits in both ways. So doing it digitally means that everyone can see. There's no trying to crowd around, or maybe someone's head is in the way, or there's nothing obstructing the view of it. Alternatively, doing it on paper means that I can show actual pens and actual marks that they would make, versus trying to duplicate that in a digital way. It's not exact. So like if I was doing watercolors or something, you could see that kind of blend from dark to light, and how that, each time you dip your brush in the paint, it adds more pigment and things like that. So there's subtle nuances for either way, and I wouldn't say that one way is necessarily better than the other in that regards. However, looking at this from the perspective of an instructional designer, if I was to create this course as a standalone presentation, that I'd want to make sure that someone could just pick it up and then go facilitate it, I kind of prepared ahead of time for the case that they may not be an artist and they may not be able to demonstrate the technique themselves, or for whatever reason, maybe they don't have the tools on hand, or the facility isn't isn't conducive to that type of presentation. In that case, I have also included a video that does a great job of going through all the steps of creating the thick and thin lines, and some tips on building the characters or the letter forms and those different things. So if this was something that I was going to package and produce and maybe resell or something, or give off to another place to do this in my place, then I would actually take the time to create the video myself, and have myself demonstrating it within the video that I embedded. However, the constraints of this assignment, I didn't have time to create that video myself, so I pulled one off of YouTube, which does a really good job. It does cover all the things that I would want to have covered. So this kind of sets the whole thing up for the ability for someone else to facilitate it, and it doesn't have to be me. So regardless of their creative abilities or their artistic abilities in doing modern calligraphy, I've got it covered. The information can still be presented even though it's not done by myself. So if it was me doing the presentation, I would do it either live or digitally on my iPad, mirrored to the display, or someone else doing it can show this video that's embedded. And thinking along those lines, I did also include instructor notes on all of these slides. If you go to the original slide deck, which I have in the files, you can see there are notes on every slide that say this or do this, or, to kind of think about how the instructor, if it was not myself, would facilitate the class and what they would need to say or do to interact with the students and kind of still bring that same learning and, the cognitive learning theories forward as they go. So now that they know how to do it, we're going to actually do it. So I have practice resources that I'll have with me in the class. So I downloaded a free practice page set from Tombow, which Tombow is a brand of calligraphy markers, brush pens. So there's a free resource there that I'm going to include, which is actually shown on the screen here, that shows how to make those practice marks. Just like when you're in school learning how to do cursive letters and doing penmanship, there's some to trace and then a space for you to create your own marks. So it kind of leads them through those first basic thin and thick marks that are really an important part of creating modern calligraphy. I've also created my own handouts, which I'll have available in the class, where they can trace letter forms. And then I also have some that are like quotes and words built together as a whole, kind of a holistic calligraphy piece that they can practice spacing and putting those letters together. So then after we kind of talk about the practice resources and how to use them, we would actually go through taking the time to do the practice. And since I would be facilitating this lesson live, I could have the students or participants working on their practice sheets, and then I can go around the room and kind of check on everybody and see how they're doing and give them feedback, or help them make those thin and thick marks if it's their first time, and kind of learn that pressure of the brush pen and how they can recreate those marks for themselves. So while I'm kind of roaming the room, I can give them feedback and correct errors. And this also goes along with Gagne's actions of eliciting performance and also providing feedback. And so because this is not a formal class in an institution like high school art, I wouldn't necessarily have an official assessment, but I would kind of call this practice portion the assessment to check and see how they're doing. It goes along with my final learning objective that they'll be able to demonstrate creating a thin and thick line. I'm not asking them to actually make good looking letters at this point. I'm just like, let's get the basics down. Let's learn those thin and thick lines, and then you can keep practicing to get those letters right. So if this was in a formal situation, like in a high school or something, I would create a rubric and have, they could have like a quiz on a practice sheet to create the thin and thick lines to demonstrate, yes, we can do this. We can be successful. This is my work here. Or we would also have a final presentation piece, like a final art piece that they would turn in to get a grade on, and it would be based on that rubric. When I was an art teacher, I would hand out a rubric in the beginning so they knew exactly what I was looking for. And then also, I could not get accused by the students or their parents that I was grading unfairly or grading them because it was good or bad, or, art is so subjective. So having a rubric is super important to keep everybody on the same page so that they know what they're getting graded on. And so I would always tell everyone, if you follow the instructions and you do the things that are on this rubric, you're going to get a good grade. And that would really alleviate a lot of tension, because in a creative environment, sometimes people don't identify as creative, or they don't think that they are, even though they're perfectly capable to do what I'm asking them to do. It feels intimidating because it's uncomfortable, or it's new, or it's different, or whatever. And in adult learning situations, it's the same thing. It's about feeling comfortable and feeling confident to try something different or new. And that's why I think following this cognitive learning theory is going to be really key, because it's going to build off of things that they already know. So we're starting from a place of comfort, like, oh, I'm familiar with calligraphy. I've seen this before. And then we're bringing them along each step of the way, building their confidence until they feel like, I can try this. And then we try it. And then I'm there to help and support and offer feedback and help them gain confidence in trying something new and making these different marks. So when they go home, they'll have their handouts with them, they'll have their practice sheets, and then that can also enhance their retention and the transfer of that learning, because they'll be able to look at that again and remember what we talked about. They'll also be able to have a link to this PowerPoint that they could take with them and look through again and kind of remember the things that we talked about. And so I would hope that this experience, this one-time lesson, would give them the confidence to try calligraphy on their own and maybe begin to practice. And, if I wanted to motivate them, since it's people that I'm going to see on a weekly basis at my church, I could say, hey, I've got a prize for you if you come back with a finished piece and show me what you've done. And that might be motivation, or, it could be something silly like, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe a gift card. I don't know if I can get some support from the church or something to help me fund a little prize or something that they could have to motivate them to do it on their own. In a school setting, obviously they'd be motivated by grades, and it would be more than just this one-time lesson. Like, this might be the introduction of the project, and then maybe we spend a week working on the project in class, where I can be there to help them and guide them and kind of help them avoid some pitfalls or correct any errors as they go before they turn it in. And then when they do turn it in, they have a successful experience because I've been there to help them all along the way. So I hope you've enjoyed my presentation on my final project application for cognitive learning on modern calligraphy. And maybe you picked up a couple of things about modern calligraphy. Who knows? But thanks for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.